You might remember, if you cast your mind back 2 mornings ago, we interviewed Will Quince. He is the Children's Minister, not a particularly well-known face. Lots of people suggesting that the Cabinet were wheeling out some of those less familiar faces because some of the big ones weren't wanting to come in front of camera. Well, Will Quince came out on camera because he'd been given assurances behind the scenes that the Prime Minister knew nothing about those allegations relating to Chris Pincher. Well, obviously he was disappointed by the news last night, that U-turn from Downing Street, and he has tendered his resignation. These are his words on Twitter. "It is with great sadness and regret that I have this morning tendered my resignation to the Prime Minister after I accepted and repeated assurances on Monday to the media, including us on GBNews, which have now been found to be inaccurate. I wish my successor well. It is the best job in government." Let's bring in Tom Harwood to talk about this, because as well as that resignation in the last few moments, we also had a more junior resignation. I think that makes it the 8th junior resignation from Laura Trott, PPS in transport. This is not a good look for the Prime Minister.
Yes, and certainly the Will Quince resignation, I think, is more significant than the number of trade envoys, than the number of PPSs, those more junior roles working for cabinet ministers that we've seen. We've seen a smattering of those names leave the payroll, as we call it, leave their front bench positions. But this is a minister who, of course, represented the government on national television just 2 days ago, and it does show the core of what is going on right now, why everything seems to be slipping away from the Prime Minister at this point in time, and that is the question of trust. And if these key ministerial positions, if these people who have been sent out to represent the government feel like they cannot trust the government, that is a big, significant issue.
Some people have been commenting that it's interesting that these people who are now tendering their resignations didn't seem to mind that the Prime Minister had misled the public, but it's when they personally had been misled that they felt that their positions were no longer tenable. Do you think that's fair?
I think it really depends on what we're trying to establish as what is misleading and what isn't. I think there are legitimate arguments that Number 10 can and have made with regard to what the Prime Minister knew and when, and indeed any of us trying to recall one conversation that happened in a busy moment in our lives 3 years ago, it's understandable how the Prime Minister may not have recalled that initially. It is obviously a line that has been widely mocked in the media and in Parliament, but it doesn't necessarily lead to that black and white stance of dishonesty. Indeed, I think there's arguments that can be made in favour of what Number 10 has said at most of these steps along the way. At most, they've been obfuscatory, I suppose, is the clearest points that we could say. But when it comes to dishonesty, that is a subjective analysis, and I suppose it's for individual ministers, individual MPs to make their own minds up on that front.
OK, Tom, thank you very much. So whether or not that was deliberately misleading his own cabinet or deliberately misleading Parliament over Partygate or indeed over Chris Pincher is a matter for debate, perhaps. But certainly if it's down to lack of judgment or perhaps forgetfulness, that comes down to competency, doesn't it? And I just remind you of the words that Rishi Sunak wrote in his resignation letter last night. He said the public rightly expect the government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. He doesn't think it is anymore.